Shut up and sit down.
The current state of politics is unsustainable, politically, economically.
You still have distrust there.
We all come from very different places.
Man, we don't want the government to do a damn thing.
We deserve better.
People have to have the information in front of them.
It is about supporting, platforming, and assisting the people who are out here actually doing the fight.
There you go. Like, just promote people who are doing something. Volunteer to work with people who you like. And
take an issue that's important to you and do something.
You are part of that declaration against tyranny.
This conversation gives me a little more hope for the future. The one, the only.
Fight for liberty. This is the cherry on top.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Fight for Liberty Live. I'm your host, David Fite, and tonight we have an awesome episode for you about how to build a successful grassroots movement. But first, I'm actually really excited to talk to you about a new sponsor for the show, Streamlabs Ultra. If you are looking to get your own quality content out into the ether, Streamlabs Ultra is the way to go. An all-in-one streaming service that combines most of the needed functionality of OBS, Restream, Shopify, and Canva, giving you an open broadcast system with guest camera and multi-streaming built in, and an online dashboard that gives you logo, thumbnail, emote, and intro creators, a website, merch store, and a whole bunch more. And all of this for less than any of the other services I mentioned. Just $19 a month, $149 a year, gets you all of this and more. And if you click the link in the description below, it'll get you $9 off your first month or $10 off your first year. So go on over, click that link, and support the channel and save money. And then an old one that you know and love, Blood of Tyrants wine. If you are looking for a nice night in while sipping on the blood of your enemies and supporting the taking down of the tyrannical state, look no further than Blood of Tyrants wine. A nice Cabernet distributed by activists you know and love. Bloodoftyrants.wine is the place to go. Use promo code F4L to get $5 off your first order. Once again, that's bloodoftyrants.wine, promo code F4L. But without further ado, tonight, we are joined by a wonderful activist. He is the Director of Issue Education for the Grassroots Leadership Academy, brought to you by Americans for Prosperity, the one, the only, Duane Lester. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I always like to kind of start off with a little bit of an intro testimonial question. So I'm curious, what first fired you up to, quote unquote, fight for liberty?
Well, I remember it was right around 2001 that I actually started paying attention, and it was what happened September 11th, 9/11, 2001. I started looking around and saying, what is even going on in the world? Because I had no idea. I was not paying attention at all. And going on, I said, okay, I need to start paying attention. And I was very much of the, just leave me alone. That's all I want. Just leave me alone kind of mindset. Mm-hmm. And if you leave me alone, I'll take care of myself and you take care of yourself. And what happened was I started paying attention. And as you can see from the background, I started reading and just started devouring as much as I could read. And in 2006, I was working as an armed security guard at a nuclear power plant. The most boring job you could ever want in your life, but the one thing that it afforded me was time to read. And in 2006 I said, I'm going to see if I can read 100 books this year.
Damn. And
I did. And as soon as I was done, I said, okay, I'm never doing anything that stupid again, because that was ridiculous. But what I found was the more I read, the more I wanted to learn. And what's amazing about reading and knowledge is the more you learn, the more you realize how little you actually know. And this is what I was finding, was how little I actually knew. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was a journalist. So I started reading and I started writing. A friend of mine turned me onto this website called Newsvine. I started writing about liberty there. And to give you an idea of what Newsvine was like, it doesn't exist anymore, but at one point it was bought out by MSNBC.com. So here I am libertarian writing at msnbc.com. My friend says, you write so much, you ought to just start your own website. And so we did. And not long after that, started the second, started focusing on Missouri politics. And that was it. I remember the one thing that, the one thing that really started pushing me away, I was full on Republican Party 2004. I was raw, brand new to it. I had the passion of the converted kind of thing going on. Yeah. And I remember sitting there watching George Bush say, we have to abandon free market principles in order to save the free market. And I felt like a dog, just confused, like, huh? Well, that cocked head kind of what?
Yeah. And
that's when I really started backing away and saying, no, the principles are what matters. You don't abandon the principles. Mm-hmm. That's when I started making that change from party first to principles first.
Nice. I like that. I got a little bit lucky that I never really officially joined the Republican Party. Neither did my parents. We were independent. They're both registered, like unaffiliated, but voted Republican most of the time. So I was raised mostly in that conservative Christian nationalist kind of thing, but without any of the party loyalty. So there wasn't anything that I had to necessarily break free from when I first heard of libertarianism and like Gary Johnson. It wasn't like, oh, but he might beat my guy, or like he might make my guy lose. It was like, who's my guy? Oh, I guess it's Gary. So that I think kind of made me a little lucky.
I remember as a Republican, I was really, like I said, the passion of the converted, looking at the Republicans as the saviors. I remember I was writing an article about the proper role of government and something about how Congress shouldn't be allocating money towards charitable things. And I found this story about Davy Crockett and a fire. And I pulled it up on this congressman's website, and I started reading what he had there and started looking into who this congressman was. And I said, I don't know, but this Ron Paul seems to have a good head on his shoulders. I kind of like where his mind's at. And I was already there with him. It was just George Bush kind of pushing me out, saying, okay, let me show you what we're really about here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Ron got a lot of people hooked. I remember hearing that name in school, or not school, I was homeschooled, but I had a like history teacher within the kind of co-op that we would meet with sometimes that had a Ron Paul bumper sticker on his van. And like that has always stuck out to me as like, I remember hearing like just little bits and pieces about what Ron stood for kind of intermingled into our economics class or our world history class or whatever. And that the ironic thing is this dude would also like unironically wear like a capitalist t-shirt with like a hammer and sickle on it. He was this weird like anarcho-communist type, but like on a very minarchist scale. He has very strange political views, but he opened my eyes to a lot of good things, including Ron. So I have him to thank for that.
It sounds like the kind of dude you want to sit down to and just ask questions.
Yeah.
Like, help me understand where your mind's at, because I don't get how you can be here and here at the same time.
Yeah, especially
help me
now.
Through that and just sit back and listen.
Yeah. So when they say that you're a builder of grassroots movements, what does that normally entail? What's the typical timeline of your involvement with a project?
I don't know where that came from, honestly. I've been working with the Grassroots Leadership Academy since 2015. Before that, I was kind of out on my own, but I don't know that there's any one-size-fits-all timeline about what's going on. It really is about if you can just capture that passion at the moment and get people moving. And I can just tell you my story and what that was like, but there are organizations all over this country that are grinding away every day, and every day they're making a little progress. You've got someone like a Spike Cohen who gets national attention, and he's able to take a grassroots movement from a speech where he points at a camera, you are the power, and now you've got you are the power across the country. But then there's also the people who are grinding away in their towns and their cities, And while those movements might never get the press, they're still going to be powerful, still going to be effective in what they're trying to do. So I don't know that I can say it takes X amount of time to get from A to B, but I can tell you that one of the things I honestly believe, and one of the things that I've seen, is that an organized minority can defeat a disorganized majority every day of the week. And just my own story. I remember you called me an activist when we started. I remember the first time someone called me that, and it was on Newsvine. And it was a guy named Jay Butler. And this had such a profound this is like 2007. Someone called me an activist, and I'm like, who are you calling an activist, Jack? I'm a guy sitting in a security with a laptop just writing articles. But yeah, I was like, okay, activist. But what that turned into was that went from me writing on Newsvine to me writing on allamericanblogger.com, and then starting the Missouri Torch. What I found was the more that you drilled down, the more impactful you could be. Yeah. So while I may have written, I wrote at All American Blogger for probably 3-4 years. And I would write, I remember I wrote a 5-piece series on the immigration system and how messed up it is, and how, because we have these things in place, we're actually hurting more people, far more people than we're helping, just in the trip across the border. That had absolutely no impact whatsoever on the whole border issue. None. Fast forward 2 years later, I write an article about something that a state senator in Missouri said, and that afternoon I'm talking to that state senator on the phone because he called me.
Damn.
That's the difference that you have when you start drilling down. And that's one of the first things I learned, is that as soon as you can start making this as hyper focused as possible, you can start having a bigger impact. So when I started focusing on Missouri politics, I remember, and if I talk too much, David, just butt in here, because I'll keep talking. I remember when I was a podcaster, I loved the folks who would just sit and talk. It was the person you'd ask a question, they'd be like, no, I'm good. And then stare back at you. You're like, why did I book this guy? But if I talk too much, just butt in.
No, you're good.
But I remember when I first went to the Missouri House, I knew absolutely nothing about Missouri politics. There's this like an arrogance about me. Well, I'm an award-winning national blogger. People across the country know me. And I didn't even know. I went down to the Missouri House in May to introduce myself as the blogger who's going to start covering Missouri politics. And it wasn't until I was walking around the Missouri House in May that I realized that the session ends in May. I remember walking around going, what the hell am I going to write about for the rest of the year? These guys go home? I thought this was year round. I didn't know anything. And so there was that learning, that immediate need to learn. And I walked around the House and the Senate introducing myself. And what I got from them was the equivalent of, oh, you're a blogger. That's really cute. There's the door. Have a great day.
Yeah.
And I remember I remember walking out of there, getting on my phone, calling my wife, and said, it has been a long time since I've been this angry. I'm going to go home and I'm going to show them why they should not have treated me that way. Again, such arrogance from someone who was completely ignorant about the way things worked. That's why I ended up writing something about a state senator, and that state senator called me. And after talking with this guy, I realized I was wrong. He was right. I issued the correction. And for the record, that guy was rock solid. He actually did things that no one else has done since he left. He was a senator. Every year he was in office, he proposed a bill to cut the Missouri House from having a session from January to May, the end of May, to January to the end of March. And he'd say, Duane, every year I come down here and they don't start working till April because they know they don't have to do anything until then.
Yep.
So why are we paying them from January to April? Let's just cut those months out. And he ended up becoming a donor actually to the site.
Wow.
But I went from being disrespected like that, and despite my arrogance, it was disrespect. It was like, okay, you think you're going to do something that's cute.
Mm-hmm.
To me starting the website, to me growing a following, I remember when I really realized the impact I was having. I was standing in the hallway, I'm leaning up against the wall, and I'm checking my cell phone. And you know how when you're checking your cell phone, you're still kind of looking around like, okay, what's going on? Who's around me? Mm-hmm. Hallway's mainly empty, and I see someone walk in front of me, and they stop, and they turn, and I'm like, okay, this could go either way. Could have been somebody I wrote something about. Could be somebody who's happy with me. No. And they walk up and they say, "Are you Duane Lester?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "I'm Representative so-and-so. Wanted to take time to stop and introduce myself to you. I appreciate what you're doing." Actually started making it at this point. Now, how did that happen? That first of all, I would say that the first reason that happened is because I knew why I was doing it. I knew, and I think that's a step, David, that a lot of people miss, is they don't understand why they're involved.
Yeah.
And, I was thinking about this conversation. I wanted to know why it is that you do this podcast. I know what it's like doing a podcast. I mean, there's some heavy work, and I'm looking, you got things booked out. When we started ramping up to this, I started getting emails that you're putting that, man, I work with half of the podcast. I may have actually listened. But what I want to know is why are you so much into this? Is this move important to you?
So I guess to answer the question, did I lose you completely?
Lose you.
There we go. I got you back.
Sorry, it's just small town Missouri internet.
You're good. That's the fastest recovery I've ever had on this show. Normally, it would have made me like end the stream and restart. So we're good. Are you back? Bear with me, guys. It's not a real stream here if there's not a little bit of a technical difficulty, right? There we go.
I'm sorry, David. I went ahead and switched over to a hotspot just because I don't know that my personal internet is going to hold up.
All right. Well, you're coming in loud and clear now, so we should be good. Can you hear me good?
Okay. I assume we're still live.
Yes. Yep, we're still good. To answer the question you were asking. Right before.
Did you hear my question about why it is that you do this?
Yeah, I to answer that more specifically about the podcast you asked first. My main goal here is to kind of highlight people that are doing cool things and making the world a better place, making it a freer place, whether that's through activism and politics or just, business, trying to make people's lives better through a cool innovation or something like that. And really the goal is to get the people watching to hear a couple of things and go, hey, that kind of sounds like fun. And then they'll listen a little bit longer and they'll get like actionable advice from the person and be like, oh, so that's how I would do it if I were to do it. And then hear some cool stories about why it's awesome. And then, eventually at the end of the show, want to go do that thing. I think one of the best episodes I've ever done was Dan Smots, the video editor. I had like 4 or 5 people message me after that episode and tell me, I've always kind of done video editing as a hobby, I went to school for it or something, but I never thought about like really using it in the movement and how much we need more video editors. And I'm gonna like go back into it and like brush up on my skills and like reach out to some local campaigns and try to make some videos for them. That's one of the things we need the most in this movement is more of those creative types like graphic and video design. So that's ultimately the goal, is to kind of fire some people up and be like, hey, I didn't realize that some skill sets that I had could actually be useful in the movement. I think we glorify politicians just a little too much.
Now think about that. What you're trying to do, man, is
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I stepped on you. But I really want to highlight the difference here between the why you do this versus the what you do. Mm-hmm. So if you were to say, well, what is it you do? You'd say, well, I host a podcast, and have people on, and we talk about stuff. Okay, that's neat. There's a lot of people that do that. But when you talk about why you do it, I do this because we need more people out there working on these things. We need people out there who have these skills, who are helping out. And I do this to inspire those people. Mm-hmm. And really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to overcome the biggest obstacle in grassroots activism there is. And that's the couch. That is the biggest obstacle you'll have.
Yep.
And so this podcast is all about moving people from the seats to the streets. And that's what I'm about. I'm all about that.
Yeah.
And so often we get people who get so involved in what they do, they forget about why they do it. Mm-hmm. But people don't care what you do. They care why you do it. That's a great lesson from a guy named Simon Sinek. People don't care what you do. They care why you do it.
Yeah. Great book.
So that's something that I think has helped me. Mm-hmm. Because, it is. Because the biggest lesson I think that I've tried to impress on people who want to become an activist is you have to get out. You have to actually get up and do something. I would have back in the day, blogger friends who would say, I don't know how how did you do this? How did you get to be so? I said, the biggest part of being a successful activist blogger is getting out from behind the keyboard. Mm-hmm. It was when I would show up at an event and I'd get to know someone. Yeah. And I remember when I first started doing the Missouri stuff, I showed up at an event and the Speaker of the House was there and the speaker had a couple of people with them. And I kind of caught the side eye. They saw me setting up a camera and it was, okay, who's this guy? Why is he here? As far as they knew, I was a tracker. I was there to set them up and to make them look bad. Mm-hmm. But I introduced myself and I said what I was doing and why I was doing it, what I was about. They didn't trust me. I don't blame them. I don't blame them at all. Mm-hmm. The next time I showed up, they had seen some of the stuff I'd put out. There was a little bit more trust there. Third time I showed up somewhere, it was, hey, Duane, it's great to see you. I love what you're doing. Keep it up. But it wasn't that I was emailing them. It was that I was showing up at his office and saying, hey, can we talk about this? I don't quite understand what's going on here. Yeah. And it was showing up at events where a lot of people were and just making myself known and getting out there. And if you are not showing up, if you think that you can send a tweet and that will make an impact. Maybe somebody sees it and you change them for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to get off the couch. You got to get out. You got to move from the seats to the streets and make a change, because politics goes to the people who show up. It's just that simple.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something you mentioned earlier with the, how you kind of switched your writing from more national to more local, that I kind of wanted to touch on, because I feel like a trap that a lot of people, whether it's podcasters or bloggers or journalists or whatever, they get into this trap of, I have to say something about all of the big stories. And there's so many people saying things about the big stories. Your blog about the Trump indictment is not going to be anything. It's just going to get lost in everything. You're not going to get any traction. The only way that you actually get traction and blow up is to break a story, to talk about something that nobody else is talking about, to actually find something and report on it. Like, that's what journalists do. They're supposed to do. I know most of mainstream media is pretty crap now too, but I feel like a lot of independent journalism, and I started to kind of get into that trap early on with my podcast too. All I did was talk about current events and what's going on today, and there's a million people running a podcast that's live right now somewhere in the world talking about the Trump indictment right now. I don't need to be talking about something like that. I'd much rather talk about how to build a grassroots movement, something that maybe there's 3 or 4 other live streams about right now, but not the million.
It's a profound insight that you're giving there, because the fact of the matter is, when you start in this, when you start podcasting, you start blogging. I remember when I started blogging, it was, man, I'm gonna be the next Rush Limbaugh with this podcast of mine, man. This is gonna be. Watch me go, man. You can't hold me back. And then I'd be like, I got 3 downloads. What? Mm-hmm. And nobody cared. I mean, I would write the most insightful thing, and nobody cared, man. Mm-hmm. And it didn't change anything, because, like you said, you're standing in a huge ocean of people, and you're screaming one thing and everybody else is screaming. Yeah. It's at that point, for me anyway, I'll speak to myself. At that point, it wasn't about the change I could make. It was about me. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? It was about me. I'm going to be a big deal. Yep. I'm going to make a name for myself. Yep. And I would have people say, "Oh, well, you're top tier blogger in the country," and I'd be like, "Not according to my numbers. Not according to my numbers. People may know me. I may get out and I go to all these things, and everybody knows me. But if they were to look at my WordPress dashboard, they'd be like, why does everybody know this guy? Right? Because nobody's reading him." Mm-hmm. It was when I made that shift from national to Missouri that I really started making a difference. And I mean, I remember there's a fun story out there about me writing an article about an audit on a sheriff's department that blew up. That was actually a national story for a while. Not for what the sheriff did, but for what a local newspaper did. We can talk about that later if you want, but what I want to really re-emphasize and back you up, when you start talking about local things, that's when you can start having an impact. I was just talking about Missouri politics, but imagine if I just focused on, if I didn't need to be nationally known, but I actually wanted to make a difference. Imagine if I just focused on Northwest Missouri, mm-hmm. or even just my district in the state. There's only 35,000 people in the district. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I could reach them. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So how big of a change could I have then, where I have a state rep who's kind of milquetoast? I mean, he's a great guy. He would sit and listen to me and then turn around and vote as middle of the road as you could get. But if I really sat and focused on District 1 in Missouri, and I had people from District 1 calling his office, that's power, man. That is making a difference. And let me tell you a story. I was sitting in a state senator's office that was another point where a state senator said, "Hey, Duane, I see you here working in the hallways I've got a conference room. If you want to come in and blog in my office, feel free. I'm like, okay, I may be making it here. So this is kind of cool. I was watching him, his legislative assistant, answer the phones one morning, dealing with the phones and the emails and the messages. And I said, hey, quick question. How many messages does the senator need to get on one specific issue before the senator really starts paying attention? So here we are, state of 6 million people in Missouri. I don't know how many was in this specific state senator's area. But this kid looked at me and said, 6. I said, what? He said, if he gets 6 messages on one issue, then he'll start paying attention to what people want. And I was like, man, that is such an indictment of every Missourian. But I would wager it's not that much better at Capitol Hill. Yeah. Once they start getting a few issues from their constituents who they actually care about, they may pay attention. But I felt that was more of an indictment of us as citizens than him as a legislator.
Yeah, 6 is a reasonable number.
If 6 people start paying attention, then we have to do something about this. There's 6 people who've called.
Mm-hmm.
So you can if you focus on something like that, if you focus on a district or you focus on a state, if you focus on a city or a school board, people will start paying attention. Because there's one thing I've learned about politicians that's almost universal, is they're motivated by fear, and that fear comes from losing that office. Mm-hmm. Some of them don't care. Like the senator I was talking about before, he was independently wealthy. He didn't need it. He was just there to, he was having a good time, I guess. But a lot of them, they don't want to lose that office. Yeah. And if you're termed out, there's another office somewhere they want to get.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up a really good point about the kind of prideful base of the start of it. Like I definitely started the podcast in the exact same way. It wasn't Rush, it was Rogan, but I started off the podcast, or the first probably 15, 20 episodes are 2.5, almost 3 hours long. I'm like, people listen to Joe Rogan for 3.5 hours. They'll listen to me for 3.5 hours. And what I quickly realized is I don't have as cool of friends as Joe Rogan. It's just not as interesting of a conversation. No matter how hard I try, I do not have the connections that Joe Rogan has. And, no one wants to listen to me and my best friend talk for 3.5 hours. 3 or 4 people did, and then I did start to get a little bit of popularity when I was doing kind of the more clickbaity hot button issues. I hosted a debate between a rabbi in Kentucky and Dave Smith. That is still my most watched video ever. I tapped into a lot of that and some of the divisiveness within the LP, and started to get big and got burned by a lot of people and crashed down to 4 or 5 views per episode for quite some time. And it made me reevaluate things. I kind of, at first I thought that I lost it, oh, what am I even doing anymore? I went up, I went down, it's over. That was a fun ride while it lasted. But then it kind of hit me more of what we're talking about, that it shouldn't be about me becoming popular or even, making money off of merch sales or something like that. It should actually be about the fight for liberty and actually making a change and doing something, not just shouting into the echo chamber, the loudest or the best or with the best graphics, which seemed to be more what I was gunning for, was just to surpass my friends that were doing the exact same thing I am.
Yeah, that's a big pill to swallow too. When you're very full of yourself, like I was, to sit back and think to yourself, why aren't people listening? And then it dawns on you, because nobody cares about what I have to say, because it's not about me. Yeah. That was one of the most humbling things my wife has ever said to me. I remember there was one time I got off the phone and I'm standing at my house and my wife says, "Who was that?" And I said, "It was Lieutenant Governor." And she said, "That's the 6th time he's called this week." And I said, "Yeah, I know." She looked at me and she says, I still don't understand why any of these people care what you think. Thank you. Thank you for that. Appreciate that.
Oh my
But
God, that sounds
what
like
I
something my
learned,
wife would say.
and I think that something you were alluding to is when I started seeing, I started realizing that if I wanted to be successful, I couldn't make it about me. I had to make it about the listeners, and that's when I started saying I have to find better guests. I can't just be me standing in front of my bookcases ranting for an hour in the morning. It has to be me talking to someone who's actually done something, saying, you know, tell me about this.
Yeah.
And, you know, you talked about you don't have as good or as interesting a friends as Joe Rogan. The one thing I learned, I remember one of my blogging mentors is back in the day, his name was John Hawkins. And he got an interview with Milton Friedman, and then he got an interview with Thomas Sowell. And I was just like, how do you get an interview with Thomas Sowell? The guy's reclusive. He doesn't talk to anybody. I said, how'd you get this interview, John? He goes, I'm going to tell you my secret. You ask.
Yeah.
And that was it. I said, that's it? He's like, yeah, just ask. He said, you ask people for an interview, and more often than not, they'll give it to you. And if they don't, then you ask again later, and more than likely, they'll give it to you. And if they don't, you'll find somebody who will. But just ask. And so you can get the most exciting people through persistence. And once you start working your way up, then you can make that change. But I don't know. You didn't want to talk about how to become a podcaster, did you?
You know, yeah, this has been quite the train, the like derailed train, but I'm enjoying it. I do want to, before I ask you another question that's on topic for the episode, I want to touch on something you just said, because, you know, I 100% agree. The like just ask thing is so true. And you specifically said, if they say no, you ask again later. And I think that was the part that I had to overcome the most, is I was always like hesitant to ask, because I thought if I asked now and they said no because I have 100 subscribers, that when I have 1,000 subscribers it would be harder for me to ask. And that's actually not the case. It becomes easier. You can, you know, figure out some creative reason why you're talking to them again. You know, oh, I wanted to focus on X this month and you're the best at it. You know, a little bit of brown nosing never hurt anybody in an ask. And you know, just keep asking. You know, that's how I've gotten Kane on the show. We got Mark Pellegrino is coming on for the 3rd time next week. It's been awesome, some of the people that I've gotten to talk to, just because a little bit of courage. But I do want to ask, back to like grassroots movement building.
You know,
I'll let you wrap up.
Okay.
When did you realize that you...
I was watching your screen and it's a little laggy, so I'm good. Go ahead.
When did you realize that you really liked doing this, and how did you get a job that allowed you to do this? And which happened first?
Well, I really liked talking to people, and I've always enjoyed teaching. So one of the things, an idea that I've been introduced to over the past couple of years is this. It's a Japanese concept of ikigai, and this is find something that you're good at, that you love, that you can make money at, and that the world needs. And I sat and thought about that, and I was like, you know, I really love learning things, but then not only learning things, but when I find something and learn it, and it excites me, I want to tell everybody about it. I want to, you know, that I sat and thought about that, and I thought that's why I would write articles, because I'd find something that I thought was cool, and I think everybody needs to know this, and then I'd talk about it on a podcast, and so I started literally going around the state and talking to people at these things, and I started realizing I am an activist. Jay wasn't just you know, using that word lightly. This is activism. So it was kind of a self-serving thing, in that I would find groups around the country or around the state, and say, look, I've got a presentation. I would love to come and talk to your group, no charge. I just want to come and talk to you about this. And then they would introduce me as Duane Lester from the Missouri Torch. You should all be reading his blog. So it's self-serving in that, they get introduced to the website, but it was also me doing something I really loved and going out and helping people learn these things. And so I was working that in Missouri, and I was actually going to I lived in Missouri, but I was going to something called the Leadership Program of the Rockies, which was in Denver. And that's a 9-hour drive. And I'm here to tell you, when I was blogging, I was not rich. I was the stereotypical broke blogger, man. I remember, I'm not exaggerating when I say I remember having a conversation with my wife where I uttered the statement, I don't know how we're going to buy toilet paper because we don't have the money. So I got accepted to this leadership program of the Rockies out in Denver, and I'm like, I don't know how we're going to do this. But every month for 9 months, I got to go out to Denver. I would take the train. I would, if I could afford it, fly. If I could afford it, I'd drive. A lot of it was just really well-timed donations from people. I don't know if you're a religious man or whatever, but I mean, there are times that I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. We have no money. We're doomed. And then I'd open the mail. I remember I opened the mail one day and there was a check from $1,500 from my pastor that said, somebody felt like you needed this, but they didn't want to give it to you. So they gave it to the church, and now the church is giving it to you.
Wow.
So it was stuff like that just kept happening and kept happening. So I'm out there at Denver. I finished this great 9-month program, come back to Missouri. I'm still wanting to do stuff. I'm still wanting to get involved. And I see in Kansas City, there's something called the Grassroots Leadership Academy that's going to be starting up a 6-week program. And I'm like, Kansas City is a 90-minute drive for me, but I'll go. I'll go because I want to learn something and I want to get involved. And I went down and I sat through the first training. And a lot of it was what I'd just gone through at LPR out in Colorado. And I sat there and I thought, I can train this. I can teach this. And so I applied. They had an opening. I applied, and I flew out to Arlington, and I interviewed, and they told me to seek satisfaction elsewhere. And I was, okay, I appreciate the opportunity. And kept working. I remember I went back I was still blogging, went to the Defending the American Dream Summit in Columbus, Ohio. The VP of GLA was there. I said, look, I'm still interested. And he said, we're interested in having you. They had a set number of people. They had like two spots, and they interviewed like 4 people. I was 3 or 4. Went back, interviewed again. They accepted me that time, and was able to take off from there. But how do you do that? I remember when the first time I talked to AFP, I'm living in a town of 1,500 people. They said, would you be interested in moving? I said, no, I wouldn't. And they said, well, we focus in Missouri. We focus in Kansas City, Jeff City, St. Louis. Those are the big places in Missouri. So I said, okay. Well, this allowed me to be a part of AFP, live in a small town, but I was flying all over the country.
No.
And there's only, I don't know how you get there. What I've said before is you could not take a more convoluted route from graduation to high school to where I am today than the one I took. But one thing I did know is that you keep taking that step forward. I mean, there were days when literally I was like, I don't know what we're going to do for food tomorrow, but I know today I'm getting up at 4 a.m. and I'm putting this newsletter out, and I'm going to keep moving forward. And it sounds trite, campy, or whatever, but I just hustled, man. I just grinded and kept showing up until things were in place where you move forward with it.
Yeah, That persistence is something that I feel like almost every guest that I've ever had on has touched on at least a little bit. Is, you know, there's always, I think it might also be a Simon Sinek book, but I could be wrong about, like, it's not buying the dip, but it's something similar of, you know, pushing through that slope down that is inevitable. Like, you never hit that success without the come up, the come down, and then the back up. Sometimes there's a lot of those, sometimes there's only one or two, but there's always at least one, and you have to just not give up then. Because I know I've done that a couple times in my life where I probably could have had something great.
I think
going.
that's Seth Godin. Is that Seth Godin, the dip?
You're right. Yeah, Godin. Simon, Seth, same fucking thing. So, in your experience, what skill sets should people already have before trying to go out and start a grassroots movement, and what skill sets should they be trying to learn really quickly after trying to launch?
I think you need to have a genuine interest in people when you get started. I think that is paramount. I didn't see any success until I stopped making it about me. It was when I started being genuinely interested in others that things started making a change. And if you don't know how now, one skill that you should absolutely learn is storytelling. And I will tell you this, I was in Alaska, I was in Wasilla, Alaska, I was training on storytelling. So I'm there to teach on this, and I get schooled by the libertarian in the back of the room. I remember he's sitting in the back, he's clearly got like a Libertarian Party of Alaska t-shirt on, and I asked the question, why should we tell stories? Nobody says anything, of course. So I ask again, come on, now why should we tell stories? And this guy in the back says, because people buy with emotion and they justify with logic. And I sat there and I looked at him for a second because I'd never heard anything like that before. And I said, say that again. And he said, because people buy with emotion and they justify with logic. And I said, that is fantastic. Can I steal that? He said, you can have it. And so I've been preaching this guy all over the country since then, because he's just spot on. People buy with emotion. How many people do you know who have become emotionally invested in something, and no matter what you present to them, they don't care. They can logic their way out of it. And you're like, but look right here, it's the facts. Nah, that's fake news. Or that's something else. So they buy with this emotion. And I think if you can learn to tell a story, you can have a big impact on people, because that's how we communicate. We communicate through stories. And I'll give you an example. So when Trump first got in office, I found myself being the one to go around the country and train activists, right of center activists, on the benefits of free trade. So just imagine that for a second. You walk into a room full of Trump supporters and you got to convince them why free trade is good and protectionism is bad.
Sounds fun.
You're walking into a lion's den wearing a meat suit. Yeah. So you walk into some place like that and you start saying, look, we need to support free trade because of this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. And that is the way that so often people come at people to convince them, to persuade them. Is let me give you all these facts, let me give this all this logic, and then I'm going to sit back in this confused state as to why suddenly you don't agree with everything that I just told you. I just gave you the facts and the figures. Well, people don't care about facts and figures. They buy with emotion. And so I'm sitting in this room, and this guy says, well, listen, Duane, these tariffs, this is just short-term pain for a long-term gain. And at this point, I'd heard all of them. I mean, my free trade presentation, I had stuff ready for every argument they would send because I'd heard them all before. I've read the books. I know the arguments that protectionists have. I've actually got a presentation in my back pocket. One of these days, I'll build it called "How to Talk to a Protectionist." But I could have said, well, you know, when you look at the historical data, actually, what this does is this causes a long-term pain for a lot more. I could have done that, and it would have had actually zero impact on anybody in the room. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't have cared. What do these people? What do they care about? What I know for a fact is they genuinely care about Americans and American workers. Yep. They're not saying we need protectionism because they are wanting to save some company somewhere or make a CEO richer. Yep. They genuinely care about Americans and American workers. So this guy says, well, this is a short-term pain for a long-term gain. I said, you know, I've heard that before. Let me tell you a story about this factory in the Boot Hill of Missouri. This is a honest to God true story. It's called Midwest Nail. It's in the Boot Hill of Missouri. And the CEO of this factory just came out and they said they are about to be destroyed by the increased cost of steel. They can't afford the cost of steel to make their nails. And these tariffs could destroy the entire factory. Now, working at this factory is a guy named Dave. Dave's worked at this factory. Dave voted for Trump. Dave is a supporter of Trump. But Dave's got a daughter, a 5-year-old girl named Chelsea. Chelsea was born with a genetic heart defect that she needs treatment for, and she sees her doctor frequently. Dave says that if the factory goes under, that he loses his health insurance. And if he loses his health insurance, then Chelsea will not have access to the medical care that she needs the way that she has it now. So, sir, what I need help understanding is why should Chelsea suffer this pain so that others somewhere may feel a little bit of gain?
Damn.
Believe it or not, I have not found a person in this country yet who's willing to tell me that Chelsea should die so that some other people can have jobs.
Yeah. That's a good one. That I 100% agree that, you know, the obsession with the facts and figures that a lot of the liberty movement particularly has been a great disservice, because so many times even like the people that we consider our best messengers will go out and do exactly what you just said of, you know, twist their sentence back around and say it back to them and be like, no, it's actually the opposite. And, you know, at that point, you're just dealing with subjective reality and delusions, and there's not much you can really do with facts if your realities are two different things. But when you actually hit emotions like that, you know, it's a lot harder to just pretend that Chelsea doesn't exist, because you just told them she does, and you're not a lying man. Mm-hmm. You know, I believe she exists, and, you know, you can't do that with a real actual person. You can't just be like, oh, well, you know, facts, figures, and, you know, it's okay if some people die because America. You know, it's a whole different ballgame.
Well, it really is about dehumanization. Mm-hmm. That's the whole foundation of that protectionist argument comes from a dehumanization. And so these stories bring the human back to it, the humanity back to this argument. We're not talking about trading chips. We're not talking about bargaining chips. We're talking about real life flesh and blood Americans that your policies are hurting. And let me show you one example right here. And that story allows it to happen. That story brings it to life. I told another story. I remember in South Dakota, same presentation. Somebody said that, the tariffs were bargaining chips. They're just bargaining chips, and so it's just short-term pain for a long-term gain. And that, this situation, I showed a picture. I instantly went over and I hit escape on my laptop. I was prepared for this. I hit escape on my laptop, and up on the screen, this giant screen, is a picture of me and my 9 kids. I don't know if you knew that or not. I have 9 kids. So standing there with my 9 kids, and I walk through each of them and introduce each of them in detail. I take my time so they get to know each child, what their personality's like, what they like, how they're growing up. And then at the end of it, I say, I need some help here. The wife and I we have this situation where if we make this choice, it's really going to benefit some of the kids. I mean, it's going to set them up. They're going to have an advantage that they don't have right now. It's really going to benefit them, but it's going to damage some of the other kids. I don't know how bad it's going to be for them, but I think they'll get over it. I think they'll recover, but it is going to hurt them. It is going to hurt them. So which one of my kids should I sacrifice? Which one of my kids should feel the short-term pain so that the others can feel the long-term gain? And I remember I looked at this crowd and I said, which one of my kids should I sacrifice to the collective so that the rest of the collective can thrive? And they just sat back and they're like, oh, well, because earlier in the event, this is where I was, to be prideful, I was especially proud of this. I started the event off by saying, okay, do we have any conservatives in the room? Any libertarians? Put your hand up in the air. Do we have any progressives? I said, do we have any collectivists? No hands went up. No hands went up. I looked at them and I said, we'll see. We'll see. And then later on, I'm like, you're all a bunch of collectivists. Look at what you're doing here. You are preaching collectivism. You're literally preaching that we can sacrifice this group to the collective so that the rest can thrive. There is no more dehumanizing collectivist argument than that right there. And you're preaching it. And so I told that story, and there was a state rep, a state senator in there, and I saw him afterwards. And I said, so what'd you think of that story with my kids? And he looked at me and goes, you jerk, you about made me cry. That's what you did. And I was like, oh, that's the power of it. That's what I was trying to do, is bring out that emotion. So learn to tell stories. But I think just as important to tell stories that isn't emphasized enough is learn sales, because that's what we're doing. We are selling ideas. And I have a whole, I mean, you look at the books behind me, there's 2 shelves. There's nothing but books on sales. I got a stack of books right there that's all about sales. And the one thing that I've been teaching for like the past year and a half is how to sell freedom without starting a fight. How to sell freedom without starting a fight. Imagine that in today's political climate, sitting down and having a conversation about politics and no fighting. Crazy talk, you say. It can be done, because the biggest part of sales that people don't think about is listening.
Amen.
And we don't listen a whole lot anymore. We listen to respond. We do not listen to understand. I'm only going to listen to you long enough to tell you why you're wrong and you're an idiot and why you hate America. But I'm not going to listen to understand your actual perspectives on things.
Right.
So that's something we have to learn to do, is to sit and listen and say, you know, I hadn't heard that before, Dave. That's interesting. Can you tell me more about that? And literally search out what's important to you, because 9 times out of 10, we may disagree. But that 10th time, that 10%, you're going to say something and I could say, you know, I care about that too. That's really important to me too. Let's talk about that. And now we're going to talk about that. And when we leave this conversation, this is something I actually just said to my son today because he was yelling at his brothers. I said, what is your brother thinking about right now? Is he thinking about what he did wrong? No. I said, what's he thinking about? He's thinking about how I treated him. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. People might not remember what you say, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
Yeah. That's a
And
really
so if
important
you can have
lesson.
a conversation and a person feels like they're heard, even if it's just yeah, absolutely. They will not remember. They might not remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And if you can make a person feel heard, they will want to come back and get that feeling again and again and again. And eventually, here's the thing about listening. Listening builds trust. So you start with the relationship. The relationship builds trust. When you have trust, guess what they'll eventually say? There's going to come a point in that conversation where you're listening where they're going to say, I don't know, David, what do you think? And now you've got them because they're inviting you. They're inviting you. You're not forcing it on them.
Yeah.
They trust you enough to listen to what you have to say. And you say, well, you know, when I think about this, I think about it from this perspective. And you know them well enough that you know what values are important to them, so you can frame things. And that, you know, I know when I think about this, I think it's really an individual liberty thing. And I think that's something that's important to you too, isn't it? Well, yeah, that is important to me. I hadn't thought about it like that before. So that relationship leads to trust. Trust leads to education. Now you can start educating folks. Now that you can educate them, guess what's going to happen? The more they start learning, you felt this, I felt this. The more you start learning about something, the more motivated you get to do something about it. You know, I had no idea that that's what eminent domain did. That's ridiculous. Wait, when did this happen? They took our whole house and they never built anything there. This is outrageous. Yeah, it is outrageous. We should do something about it. Actually, we're going to City Hall to do something about it. Oh, count me in. I'll be there. So education leads to motivation. Motivation leads to mobilization. That's where you get people from the seats to the streets. But it takes time. And we get impatient because we think, look, I gave you all the facts and figures. Why are you so stupid you can't see this? We're not taking the time to actually persuade someone. Yep. We're just expecting them to abandon everything that they believe at this point, accept our beliefs, and move alongside with us. That's not how it works. And I don't know if we're just impatient, but it takes time. Sales don't happen on the first touch most often. Most sales will take 6 or 7 touches before the buyer actually says, yeah, I'll buy that, because you have to build up that trust.
Yeah.
And I think those two things right there, learning to tell stories and learning to listen, learning to persuade, learning to sell, those are two things that if you can learn those things, you can make a huge difference wherever you're at.
Amen. Yeah, I'll just echo that 100% as far as the learning how to sell, because everything is sales. And, you know, I've got, this isn't all sales books, but about half of this shelf is sales book. We've got the Little Red Book is Selling up on top. Like, 100% agreed. I owe a lot of what I'm good at now to the fact that I spent 7 years of my adult life in almost exclusively commission-based sales jobs. And, you know, they suck a lot, but they teach you things that you need to know for life if you want to actually change people's minds. And I'll do a little shameless plug, because next month's Fight Club episode on the 9th is going to be me and Harrison Kemp, Brian Nichols, and Jeremy Todd all just talking about sales and our careers in it, and just kind of shooting the shit and having a water cooler conversation. But, you know, about how much their sales techniques have impacted their ability to sell liberty to people. And, you know, it is 100% important. You know, if you're sitting here listening to this and you're in between jobs right now and there's some like really high-paced commission sales job available in your area, take it. Just do it for a couple months. Even if you hate it, the training is so worth it.
Yeah, there's a book by Daniel Pink called To Sell is Human. And in this book, fantastic book, by the way, he talks about the fact that I think like 30% of us are in direct sales jobs, but the other 70% are in indirect sales. We're all in sales. It might not be, hey, I want to talk to you about this insurance policy, but we got to sell our boss on our idea. We got to sell our kids on, you know, where we're going to go on vacation. We got to sell all the time. We are constantly selling. And I was thinking to myself the other day, I said, man, I really want to get a sales job so I can try some of this stuff out. Then I thought, moron, you're in a sales job. All you do is sales. You go around and you sell people on, Here's some ideas on listening better. I'm going to sell you on the idea of free trade. I'm going to sell you on the fact that storytelling is important. It's all sales. And if I will say this, if you have a job, or if you have the opportunity to get a job in sales, direct sales, I agree with you. Take it. It would be fantastic, but there's a thought banging around in my head that keeps wanting to come out, and I can't think about what it was I was going to say. But I will emphasize, we are all in sales, and it is important to know that, especially if you are in the idea of moving people towards liberty. We are in a country now that accepts so much statism as standard operating procedures. The very idea of some of these concepts that we take as rational, they see as bizarre. They see as outlandish. And you've got to know how to sell in order to do that. And here's the thought. I knew it would come back to me. If you know how to sell, you will never be out of a job. Think about that. If you know how to sell, you will never be out of a job. So even if you don't want to sell, learn how, because you can use it in your activism. But then if something bad happens, you can go down and you can sell Buicks on the corner and you still have money coming in. If you can sell, you'll never be out of a job.
True that. Man, I just did the same thing. I had a thought and then it lost me. Man, don't do drugs, kids. That was my thought. I was gonna play a little bit of devil's advocate.
Let me tell something I was thinking about earlier that I hadn't had.
Sorry, because I agree that most people are in indirect sales, but I don't think that it's a total of 100% anymore. And I think that's one of the problems with, the world, society, whatever, is that, it's along the same lines as the dehumanization and everything else of this kind of separation of people, that a lot of the sales have been done for you. If you're working for, like, let's say McDonald's or Walmart or something like that, you're not really selling any of the stuff you're doing, or you're selling. It's already been sold through a commercial or through, just nostalgia or whatever, and you're just bringing them up. I think that there's a big problem there, that a chunk of especially my generation has never sold a damn thing that they're aware of. They might have sold themselves to get that McDonald's job, but past that, they have no experience with actually convincing someone of something because they don't have to in their day-to-day lives.
Well, we could devil's advocate that. I mean, that same kid who's the register jockey at McDonald's, they still got to sell their parents on whether they can use the car that weekend. They have to sell their coworkers on who's going to actually mop back there in the grease pits. There's still going to be sales, but it just won't be the direct sales. Like, they're not out there on the corner saying, "Hey, buddy, you want a hamburger?" But there is some sales somewhere. They're trying to persuade someone.
Yeah. And
so there is that. One thing, I don't know how much longer you have us scheduled for, but we talked earlier, and it really made me think about something that Gary Vaynerchuk wrote. I don't know if you were familiar with Gary V.
Oh yeah.
But when it comes to activism, for me, I think one of the things that have made me most successful is that I don't ask for a lot other than to let me help you. So when I would go and I'd say, "Hey, if you see something that people should know about, let me know, and I will put it out there. If there's something going on that you can't be out front on, let me be out front for you. I will take it and I will run with it." And Gary Vee has a book, and it's kind of an old book, but it was called Jab, 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 Right Hook. And the whole idea behind Jab, 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 Right Hook was each jab was a give. I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you something. I'm going to give you something. And then maybe I'll ask for something. Mm-hmm. But it's not very often that I'm going to ask for something. More often than not, it's, "How can I serve you?" And that's actually how I answer the phone. You ask anybody, they call me, it's, "Hey, how can I serve you?" because I want that idea that, look, I'm here to help you. And that's really the mentality that I want people to have in activism, is that you're going into this to make a change, to help someone. If you're going into it like I did at the beginning to make a name for myself, there's plenty of people out there who will look at that and say, well, if you're making a name for yourself, then that's a spot that I can't be in, so I'm just going to push you aside. But if you're coming up and saying, David, how can I help you get this seen? How can I help you get this message out? How can I help you stop this thing that I know you want stopped? And that's actually the key to donors. If you want to start getting donors have things that they want done in society, but they don't have the ability or time to get them done. It really is about comparative advantage.
Yeah.
My comparative advantage is in making stacks and stacks of money and giving it to you, because your comparative advantage is going out and getting people to show up at the city council meeting. So you have to explain to the donor, look, I know you want this done. I know this is something you care about. I know you don't have time to do it, but I do. And I want to be the one who helps make your vision a reality. I need your help of this gift. If you can give me this gift of $1,000 or $5,000, I can get what you want done.
Yeah.
That's fundraising 101, is let me give you the vision of what I can do to help make both of our realities work. And
man, I'm over here taking notes.
You start getting into Ludwig von Mises here. He wrote in Human Action, the Human Action model. This is really the way to get people from the seats to the streets, is you have to give them a vision of a better state. You have to say, here's how things could be. And first you have to give them a sense of unease. Let me take that back. First thing you do is give them a sense of unease. Now, when I talk about sense of unease, a lot of times people will hear that and think, oh, you got to scare him. You got to make him upset. And I'm like, no, people are motivated by two things. They're motivated to avoid pain. They're motivated to gain pleasure. So when you talk about a state of unease, you can say things like, hey, things are really good right now, but they could be a lot worse. That we need to avoid this pain. Or you could say things are really good right now, but they could be a lot better. We need to go grab this pleasure. Yeah. You'd say things are really bad right now, but they could be a lot better. Let's grab that pleasure. Or things are really bad right now, but they could be a lot worse. Let's avoid that pain. So you create this state of unease, and then you give them a vision of a better state. You know, if we do this, this could be the reality we live in. So you got two things there. Sense of unease, a vision of a better state. But Mises said the key part of it is step 3, and that's giving them a realistic plan to make that vision of a better state a reality. Yeah. Because I could come up to you and say, David, you know, things are bad right now, but they could be a lot better. And, you know, if you and I just took over the White House, we could fix this. And you'd be like, yeah, how are we going to do that?
Right.
Like, you know, I worked that out, but, you know, this is the plan. You're like, thanks, pal. I'm just going to talk to Spike Cohen about anarchy. You go charge the barracks or whatever. You go climb that fence. There's no realistic plan. If you have a realistic plan, then people are like, yeah, I do like that, and we can make that happen. That's why Spike's having so much success with You Are the Power, because he's giving that realistic plan. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, did you just describe the Libertarian Party in that sentence? Like, you know, all we have to do is take over the White House, and then everything will be great.
Yeah,
man. And I agree. That's one of the main reasons Spike has had the success that he's had. And a lot of movements, subsets of the movement have failed the way that they have, is because, it's really easy to have a thing that you're upset about. It's easy to even maybe sell people around you to be upset about it too. But it's not easy to actually put in the work to write the bill, go to the state house week in and week out to talk about it, speak on it, meet with representatives, all of that work. That I don't want to do that. I just want to have a podcast and tweet about stuff. Like, it's so much easier that way.
Right. Yeah. and that's, I mean, I've been there. I've been there.
Yeah. So one of the things we've been doing every episode lately is a question from the missus, because she thinks my show is too politically centered, and she thinks it's boring like that. So we have to throw in some spicy questions. So her question for you tonight is, if you could change one major event in history without any like crazy butterfly effects screwing anything up, what would you change?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. There's a lot of history out there to really think about there. One major thing. How long a time span does that work? I mean, you could say the rise of the Third Reich would be one you'd want to avoid. I've also said on multiple occasions that 2 German philosophers have killed more people than the German army. So maybe it's getting rid of this whole communist mentality. Wow, that's a good one.
That would be kind of interesting. If you went back and got rid of Marx and then came back to 2023, that would be a really interesting reality to live in. No one has ever heard of Marxism.
Yeah, but you have to think, how many more people would you have to get rid of? Because Marx didn't come up with that alone. He built on so many other, collectivist giants before him.
Yeah, you might come back and it's worse, and the other person that ended up becoming...
I would probably say, yeah. Yeah, I don't have a real good answer for that, because it's the butterfly effect. You know, you would go back and stop something because you think it would have an impact later, but if it doesn't have an impact later, then why would you go back and stop it?
Yeah.
Wow, I don't have a good enough grasp on history to tell you.
Fair enough.
Maybe go back and the first time someone is going to enslave someone, to be like, don't do that. Don't do that.
That's a good answer. I like that one. Yeah, she asked me this question like just before I sat down for the show, and I was like, damn, I don't have an answer for that one. Normally she'll write it like the day before and I'll have a chance to kind of ponder it over, but I'm like, man, that's a tough one. But I've got one more on topic question for you.
That's a lot to talk about there.
How do you narrow down a mission and an objective to focus on as a movement?
You know, Saul Alinsky talked about something like this when he wrote, what was that book? Rules for Radicals. It took me a second. I had to actually look over at the book on my shelf and think, what was the name of that book? Yeah, Rules for Radicals. Alinsky was known as a pragmatic populist, and he would not take on things that he didn't know he could win. And I know that sounds shady, but he also understood that people are attracted to winning movements. So if you're going out and you're crashing the barricades and losing every single time, people are going to get tired of that. Yeah. People get tired of losing. And so you have to look at what can you realistically do and be pragmatic. It goes back to picking those battles small enough to win and big enough to matter. And it might not be, your end game may be something completely different, but I can't get that right now. That's outside of what's called Overton's window. But this little fight right here, we can win this. And if we win this, then maybe we get a few more people, and that allows us to move a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further. And so it might be having the vision of the dramatic change you want to make, but recognizing that you can't take over the White House. You've got to take these small bites. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So saying, here's the vision of what we want, and here are the little steps that we're going to have to take to get there. We're going to have to be pragmatic, and understanding that if there is a wild idea out there, and I see some people do this online, they'll take a stance on a really wild idea that's outside of Overton's window with the sole purpose that someone else can come back and say, that's a little too radical. What we should do is this. And that's on the edge, on the inside of Overton's window. And then people are like, that guy's nuts, but this person, that's not a bad idea. We can do that. Because when you see the extreme, this over here doesn't seem so extreme, and then you're able to move the window a little bit. You're able to lean things a little more towards liberty, and you can have the vision, but you got to have the realistic path to get there.
Yeah. It's the Vermin Supreme Spike Cohen effect. I think they did what you're talking about very, very well with, you know, kind of having a radical that's way out and then having somebody else to kind of pull people back into reality and with an attainable, measurable, you know, goal.
Yeah, we see this. We saw Rand Paul do this too when Trump was in office. Trump would say something completely wild, and Rand Paul would be like, I don't know about that, but we could do this, and people would be like, that's not a bad idea. Let's do what Rand Paul said.
Yeah. Yeah. He's somebody that gets a little too much shit from our side of the world, when I think he's actually done a lot more good than anybody will ever realize, because you have no idea what kind of conversations happened behind closed doors while Trump was in office that, you know, he might have single-handedly stopped us from going to war with Iran. Like, that's a fully legitimate possibility.
Agreed.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to shout out anything that you're working on right now, any like upcoming speaking engagements that you have, and how people can get involved with GLA and AFP.
Well, if you go to glatraining.org, it's just glatraining.org. You can see everything that GLA is doing over there. You can reach out to us. I think my email's on there, but if it isn't, it's just D Lester, Lester, at afphq.org. And what I'm working on right now, we actually, like I said, I spent the past year and a half going around the country and talking about how to sell freedom without starting a fight. And that is that has been the most fulfilling work I've done with GLA since I've joined, but it's also been the most emotionally taxing because the stories that I hear about the way families are treating each other is just heartbreaking. Yeah. Just heartbreaking. I'm standing there talking to a guy in Colorado, and he says, I haven't talked to my son in 2 years. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing, man? Why is politics more important than the relationship with your son? I got a guy in Maine who looks to me and says, well, what do you do, Duane, when they just look at you and they say they hate you? And so one thing I'm working on, and I don't know how far we'll get with it, but I like the idea of putting together something called a civility project. And I know there are other aspects of the Stand Together community, specifically the Free Speech and Peace Priority Initiative that are working on civil conversations. But I like the idea of helping bring families together who were once fighting. You know, some of the best feelings I've had is after these trainings and someone comes up to me and they said, I haven't been able to talk to my kids, but I think what you taught me here today is going to help me. And I'm just like, that's so great for me. I mean, I can't tell you how I just love the idea that there are families out there and the dad or the mom is sitting there with their kids and just saying things like, well, tell me more, because they recognize the goal isn't winning this argument. The goal is having a good relationship with my kids. And politics, that can happen down the road. So I like that. I'm working on something else called Overcoming the Backfire Effect. And that's how to actually change people's minds, how to actually, to get them to think about things differently so that they change their minds. People say, well, how do you change someone's mind? I'm like, you don't. You don't change a person's mind. you can just put them in a state where they have to make a decision. And I love putting people in a state of cognitive dissonance. It's one of my favorite things to do, because for me, I'm helping you grow at this point. You have conflicting ideas and you need to straighten this out. So I will get people to argue with themselves in class. And I'm like, you're not arguing with me, friend. You're not arguing, you're arguing with yourself. And a great example of this was I was teaching criminal justice reform at the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University.
Oh man, I really wanted to hear that story. Well, I'll do this in the meantime. Guys, thanks so much for watching so far. Definitely don't miss the next couple episodes. Next week, we've got Danny Lundy out of Indiana talking about how to run a successful campaign. We've got Forest Mommy talking about activism and her city council campaign coming up. And this coming up Tuesday, the 11th, don't miss out. Fight Club, we've got Mark Pellegrino versus Spike Cohen, and that's going to be an awesome debate on, is anarchy the purest form of capitalism? Spike's taking the yes, Mark's taking the no, and we're going to try to have a civil, awesome conversation over there with them. I don't know if Duane is going to be able to come back in here, but I want to make sure that I say thank you anyway, because this was an awesome episode. And definitely go check out all the links in the description below to follow Duane, figure out more about what he's doing, and then buy some merch, do some fun stuff. Come back here on Tuesday. But until then, keep up the fight.